Oh, hello. I'm never doing that again. I'm never doing that for a cold open. Also, I hate this webcam so much. Stop autofocusing, you piece of garbage. There we go. Let's put myself back in here. Salut tout le monde. Hopefully that you've had a decent week up until now. Today's been a pretty big deal day. So much Sean this week, I dig it. It has been a lot of me this week. You're absolutely right. I will have streamed this week, Saturday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and today. So 4 out of the 7 days to, this week, which is not bad. I don't typically stream on Saturday. I start the rewatch, but I'm not. That's less me. That's somebody else. Before we get on to my sins, there are a couple of things we have to point out. The first is, in case you have not been made aware, the Exalted Essence Kickstarter has been launched, and it has been funded, and all stretch goals have been met already. Did not take long to get that going. I tell you what, because they did a pretty good job so far. They're now 300% funded. They posted 4 stretch goals earlier, 15 minutes after the launch, hoping to give time to get organized again on top of it. But we've already got through all of them. So there's racking up another set of stretch goals. Let's see, there's a ready-made characters PDF, which is coming up. Enemies of the Chosen, so antagonist and NPC examples, and a Redbubble backer t-shirt opportunity are the next things that will go up in terms of funding. So we'll see how those go as well. Yeah, everyone did build power. It's almost at 200k now. Let me see. I'm reading that it is currently sitting at 118,507. Yeah, so it's almost at 120k. So they've been doing pretty well. That ain't bad. I'm hoping that they'll continue to do well, because this is a project which I think involves some good opportunities for people. Exalted Essence is specifically designed for a more condensed, more streamlined version of the game, which I think that for a lot of people, that's exactly what they wanted, us included. Not saying that I don't like the expanded version of Exalted, but I do think that this is going to be better for us, specifically for streaming. So, yeah, it's already outpaced both Dragon-Blooded and Lunars, because I think that people really like Exalted, but I think that there's a lot of demand for a version of that game that's easier for people to pick up, especially easier for people who are not so into advanced role-playing that they're ready to deal with a book that is this size. To give you an idea, this book has 660 plus pages in it, and Exalted Essence will have 250 or thereabouts that they are looking for. Yeah, it is a chonker indeed. So we're and that's also for all the rules, including all Exalt types. This only includes Solars. So that's a lot, and I'm hoping that it'll be good. The first bit of the manuscript has been released. We'll see about the rest. We're hoping that we're going to get a hold of the rest of the manuscript and be able to have time to see. Unfortunately, the conversion rules are in the appendix, and that's the last of the manuscript that's going to be set out. So, so this is this is the core for Exalted 3rd Edition. It is huge. It's a very nice book. Like, it's printed well and all that. Its binding is not necessarily the best. One of our copies of Exalted 3rd Edition sort of fell apart. But yeah, it is massive. Now, to be fair, if you bought the 3 D&D books, Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and DMG, and put them together, they would also be quite large, but there you go. It is pretty and ridiculous. It is both of those things. And it's absolutely both those things. So, we'll have to see. I remember having Exalted 2nd Edition, never understanding it. I don't actually think Exalted 2nd Edition is good. I bought it, I played it, I loved it, but after playing 3rd, I would not go back to 2nd. And honestly, I think that 2nd has a lot of things in it that I wouldn't have changed from 1st either. So there is that. I'm sorry that you're fighting brainbots, Luke, but it's things are getting better over here, so that helps. Well, part of it is that it's print on demand Zen of Games, which is sort of like why we've backed it. We may change our backing level at some point. We're still debating whether we want to go for the deluxe hardcovers or not. It's very expensive to go for the deluxe compared to the normals, and the books are only coming out in 2023. It's going to take some time to get all of this sort of set out. According to the Kickstarter, if I don't miss my guess, the goals for delivery, even the PDF, is March 2023. Now, the manuscript will be released. We'll be able to play, but the actual book itself will not be available until March 2023. And they have shot over deliberately. That is correct. And have they mentioned that in the actual campaign specifically? Let me just see here. I mean, they do a good job with their campaigns, but it's not like they haven't done a million of them so far. Unfortunately, international shipping is becoming increasingly expensive and is often prohibitive to non-US backers. So that's something that we're just going to have to be aware of as well. So it's it is a thing. I don't see specifically where it says that they've deliberately overshot. But yeah. So we'll have to see. Yeah, Luke, it's absolutely like, look, the shipping is not an easy thing for anybody at this point in time, but they have done it for years. So we're just gonna have to hope that it comes in sooner. We got in our backing early, but there's no penalty to change your back. So we'll figure it out as well. Now that, of course, they've also got a storyteller screen out. But yeah, we're gonna see. Specifically, we're looking forward to going through the manuscript. We are hoping that we can have the time so that for our second season we can really see if we want to shift over to Essence. I'm going to bet that it's going to be pretty tempting to do so. But whether we want to convert our current campaign or start a new one is something that we're going to have to find out when we actually get a chance to look at the rules as presented. All right, so let's get down to our topic of conversation for today, because as much as the Essence Kickstarter is interesting for us, there isn't really much more to say beyond that. Seeing as how we've only just had it, I haven't had the time. I've been at work, so I haven't had the time to look through and really sort of figure out exactly what what I'm going to say about that first chapter. So we'll say, yeah, the temptation to play other splats might call them. I mean, that's the thing. The story is interesting for them, and I know that it's very tempting to not let go of current storylines, but I also know that new things are shiny, and new things are shiny, and shiny is good. So we'll just have to see. But I don't have the answers for that yet, so we'll just have to sit back and figure it out on our own. Now, in the meantime, if I open up our Discord here, posted in our Discord just today was Requiem, who posted videos made by Seth Skorkowski. Specifically, he has a series of kind of lists of countdowns, and one of them, of which there are 3 of these videos, are 7 deadly Game Master sins. Now, they are. I'm going to be quite honest with you here. The videos are actually worth a watch if you're interested in that. I personally threw them up at 2x speed because I felt like, well, first I wanted to get through them fast so that I could have them in time for today, but also he speaks quite slowly, so I think that it's not too hard to understand if you throw it up at 2x speed. I will say that there's stuff that I don't necessarily agree with in all of these videos, but that's because that's my opinion. Obviously, I cannot be considered like very specifically the authority on this subject. I'm not. But we're going to go through. I'm not reviewing the video. There will be a couple of places where I'll mention that if he put forward a sin that I don't agree with, I will mention it. But we're going to go through all of the sins that he went through. He listed 21. We're going to see what we have to discuss about them, and we're going to see if there's any that we think that he missed. These are specifically sins that game masters or storytellers or whoever, what they do wrong in terms of games, mistakes that they make, common mistakes, and then what maybe they should be on the lookout for so that they do not make those mistakes again. So let's go. We're going to go right in the same order. I wrote them down as I was watching these videos. So let's discuss, and let's see how... Can you share your own sins you noticed? Yes, absolutely. This is not a regimented show. So please, by all means, throw them out there. We're just using them... We're just using this as a kickoff point. As much as there were 21 things, a lot of them are kind of overlapping a little bit, so it's not going to take us that long to go through them, and I'd love to hear your comments on what we're talking about, but also your own sins that you want to put forward, either because you've noticed them in others or you have noticed them in yourself. Right off the bat, the first one is excessive world building. The skit that was accompanied with this was essentially a dungeon master who started speaking about the lore behind a certain castle for ages and ages and ages, when somebody just really wanted to know who lived there currently. I think that excessive world building is the kind of thing that people might really enjoy doing. The trick is, I wouldn't say that this is a sin to excessively world build. It's a sin to info dump. And it's no good to take up all of your players' attention and time for too long going over the things that you have so meticulously crafted yourself, because honestly, we're there to tell a communal story. We're not there to hear you just essentially tell us all of your notes about the novel that you're writing, which is sometimes what that feels like when you get an info dump. But I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to be too prepared if it's something that you enjoy doing. But you also have to remember something else. In a lot of game systems these days, and this may not have been as true when he made this video originally, in a lot of game systems, players have the ability to exert their will not just upon their character's actions, but upon the world itself. Whether in Exalted, for instance, you can use the lore ability to establish a fact, to in other games, it being built right into the mechanics as well. There may be an issue if you take too much time building up the world too much and not letting anyone else contribute to that. I'll also point out that if you spend an awful lot of time building your world and your players do things that do not take you in the direction that you want them to, you may feel like you have wasted your time. So my recommendation is build the world, enjoy building the world, build the world as much as you like, but with the understanding that no one is obliged to hear anything about what you have said about that world, up to and including your players deciding to quit the game, which they may do, because not everybody can continue playing the game for a long period of time. So I would absolutely say that excessive world building may be, the definition of it might be a bit different. Definitely don't info dump your players. Let them find things out the way that they want to find them out, and don't take away the spotlight from them too much. But hey, go for it if you want to. Let's look at Plucky Heroes. So Plucky's list of sins: lack of confidence in my own ability. I'm gonna mark. You know what? I'm actually gonna save this comment because there's some that I think might be different from the ones there. Lack of confidence in my own ability, taking too much time to course correct where too much freedom might be at the cost of structure and player enjoyment, and sometimes being too much of walkover. So 2 of yours did come up in these videos. Taking too much time to course correct when too much freedom might be... So hold on. Taking too much time to course correct where too much freedom might be at cost of structure and players enjoyment. You don't necessarily need to course correct for your players all the time. A certain amount of railroading isn't necessarily a bad thing. Railroading is a problem when your players no longer feel like they have a choice. If you engineer elements in the story to make it so that your players make the choice that you think is important, that's fine. And if you engineer events in the game that make for some railroading but is in the service of the story and the characters, that can also be fine as well. Having somebody pull up outside the character's house and say, get in the car, I gotta take you somewhere, and the players are like, I guess we gotta go, is not railroading. When players are like, I don't want to get into the car, and then you say, yeah, but you get in the car because you have to go somewhere, that's railroading. Make sure that you give them choices and options. Give them the agency that they need. But you don't have to worry too much about course correcting all the time. It's okay to railroad sometimes if it's necessary. And then sometimes being too much of a walkover is covered later on by his list. Yeah, your players do have the ability to influence the game and should have the ability to give their feedback to you, but you are also there to provide adjudication and to help build things of your own volition. You have a privilege and a responsibility to the game that others should not necessarily take advantage of. And then lack of confidence in your own ability is absolutely I mean, look, that's something that we're all going to have to deal with, but I'm going to save that one because that's such a huge one. We'll save that one towards the end. Brain Turnet says the biggest GM sin is GM versus player. A lot of D&D adjacent roleplays force the games into becoming some sort of versus game. It should not be the case, but in performance-centered systems like D&D, it's really common. So this is something that I've seen some people resist. The idea that sometimes you just do want to play versus the DM. The problem is that storytellers cannot be competitive against their players because they hold all the power. There's no reason for a storyteller to try to grind their players into dust. If they do so, they can do so very easily. They can simply call rocks fall, everybody dies, and that's that. There's no challenge there, and then nobody's going to have fun with it. But players do sometimes want to feel like they are going up against the scenario that the storyteller has created and are attempting to beat it or defeat it. And that's a style of game that's perfectly legitimate. It's a bit more gamey. It's a bit more like a video game than a communal storytelling experience, but that's okay. And that's allowed. But the storyteller can't get wrapped up in me versus players. The storyteller is a designer at this point, designing a scenario so that they can challenge and amuse the players. Now, if players start taking things out personally on the designer, on the storyteller, that's no good either. And that's something to be avoided. But storytellers have to get out of the mindset that it's me versus the players. It needs to be more of the mindset of it's me designing something for the players to challenge the players. It's not me against them. So in that case, I would absolutely agree with you there. Let's see. So we also have from Requiem here. In my experience, when I want a certain plot point to happen, I keep it fluid enough to take place wherever the players might end up. Say they need to protect a village from an attack. In my mind, it does not always matter what village is being attacked, as long as a village is being attacked. Not sure that falls under railroading. So you have to be careful that you're not quantum ogring, which is a point that Pukajutsu was bringing up actually in a stream that I was doing 2 days ago. So the quantum ogre, the concept of the quantum ogre is no matter what the player does, they will encounter an ogre. If they go left on the path, there's an ogre. If they go right on the path, there's an ogre. The quantum ogre has two fallacies in it, which can be difficult for players to deal with. The first is feeling like their decisions don't matter. If they're like, well, if I went left, I saw an ogre. If I went right, I saw an ogre. So no matter what I'm going to do, I'm going to see an ogre. Means that the player doesn't feel like their actions make any difference in the game. The other thing is, if players are specifically trying not to encounter an ogre, and they do everything in their power to not encounter that ogre, and then they encounter the ogre anyway, it can feel really flat. So the danger is that saying, I need to protect a village from an attack, but it doesn't matter which village, that's fine. But the point is, it can't be, we're trying to head to a village that will not be attacked, and you're like, well, whichever one you go to will be the one that will be attacked because I need it to be the one that you were at. Just be a bit careful that you're not removing your player's agency at that point. It isn't that common, and quantum ogres are a little bit like they're rarer than I'm making it seem. But the main issue is to make sure that your players still feel like they have agency, that what they're doing matters in the world, as opposed to they are sitting in a place and just being thrown whatever they do, even though like they're not being railroaded because they get to choose where the car is going. Thank you, Orbikwall. They're not choosing where the car is going. They're actually they're choosing where the car is going, but it doesn't matter because the scenery will shift. Just like railroading in that particular case. So there is that. Moving back to the list. So we're actually going right into here. So number 6 on the first video was being too controlling, which is essentially railroading. The idea that no matter what, the player has to do what you have designed them to do. The idea being that in a role-playing game, a player is given a sandbox, is giving a lot of options. And if you take away all of those options and say you have to do this one thing, that's no fun. That's against player agency. I will point out that storytelling is an activity that is more communal than it would first seem. In general, you are telling a story together with everybody else. If you ignore that and say, but this is the story I want to tell, then your players are not role-playing. They are merely going through the motions of hearing the story that you're trying to give, which may not be what they want. So, Plucky Hero saying, I definitely think that this is the trade-off between not allowing your prepared events and stories being wasted if you don't have time. I think sometimes you don't have luxury to prepare a whole big sandbox, so it is tricky. This is one of the disadvantages of preparation GMing. If your players do something you totally did not expect, you may not have the muscle in your head to deal with it as an improv GM would. However, improv GMs run into similar issues that if they can't think of something, they're boned, or even if they can think of something, it does not appear cohesive if they can't keep all the threads in their mind together. So there's absolutely issues on both sides. Number 5 was a critical player campaign. A critical player character. So the idea that you put one PC as the sort of main hero and everyone else ends up being that PC's sidekick. it was emphasized in the video that it's okay if for a session or one sort of storyline, somebody is more in the spotlight than the others, but that this should not be something that's done as a matter of course. I think that this is absolutely something that I've witnessed. To be fair, most of these mistakes I've probably made at some point, right? I think everybody has. Not all of them. I don't do excessive world building. I definitely don't do that. But but I have seen it. I've seen in live action games, one of the storytellers basically bend over backwards to do anything that they possibly could to protect one player character because they liked that PC more than the others. And it made everyone else feel shitty that no matter what they did, the other PC was going to win because they were a favorite. So that's more favoritism, which kind of gets there later. But it was also that like the storyline had to revolve around that player character. That player character was essentially a chosen one. And yeah, that sucks. That absolutely sucks. Who wants that, right? The idea of sitting down together in a game does not necessarily mean that everyone has to participate at the same level. Some players don't want to. They would like to take a step back. They want to be more of a sidekick. They don't want all the spotlight and all the focus on them. But in general, if you're showing up, you want to play a role. You want to play an equal part. And you didn't necessarily show up to be a sidekick. You showed up to be the protagonist, the hero. So it is a balancing act that you have to make sure that every player feels like they're participating in the story to the level that they wish to participate at. So that's kind of the thing that I would tack on to this criticism, is that some players do not want to be put forward, and that's okay. But in general, you got to be careful with that. You do not want to end up in that situation. Brain Tornado says another big sin, disencouragement of roleplay. I'll go back to my performance-centered systems comment because I have some big gripes with that. A lot of stories are way too rigid and have to follow a specific sequence. You could have an entire game table angry at you over killing/stealing and essentially completely avoiding certain parts of the game's story only because you wanted to roleplay. It is a balancing act here. This is, again, a pacing question. If players want to roleplay, if they want to spend the time, instead of pursuing the end of the story, to pursue personal character stuff or to goof around or to really kind of spend more time in some parts of the story than others, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it isn't necessarily a good thing either. This is where your pacing has to keep up. Your narrative sense needs to be put forward, because players might feel like they do want to sit around and just talk amongst themselves, but there's a few things that you got to check. The first is everybody engaged in wanting to stay where they are and not progress in the story? Or is it two people at the table who are talking and wanting to do something, but then the others are like, we would really rather see the ending? Is it that people are goofing off and stuff like that, but then after the fact, they'll leave the session kind of being like, well, yeah, but we didn't do anything? Players aren't necessarily going to be thinking about the pacing of the story the way that you might be. So as much as this might be really fun for them in the moment, it may end up feeling unsatisfying. Kind of like eating only chocolate and realizing you didn't actually have any dinner. It might have felt good at the time, but then after the fact, you may not feel great about it. Thank you for the host. So in general, you do want to make sure that the story is progressing. You want to make sure that enough stuff happens in a session that everyone feels satisfied, but you absolutely don't want to discourage roleplay if that's what your players are interested in. Thanks, Felipe. It's very kind of you. Me just rambling about narratives and about how storytellers aren't good. So we just covered this one, but yeah, general GM sin is having favorite players or characters and let it hold too much sway. I think it's human to have a little bias, but they shouldn't be significantly compromise their role as storyteller. So I will say this, it's okay to have a favorite. It is absolutely okay to have a favorite, and it is okay to have a player who you know you can lean on a little more on some cases. That's fine. In much the same way that, yeah, parents will maybe claim, I don't have favorites among my children, but they may absolutely have favorites among their children. The trick is to not let that change how they treat their other children, right? So there is that we have to pay attention to, right? Favorites can also shift and depend on the campaign, depend on the session, depend on that day. Maybe that player just pissed you off, so they're not going to be your favorite that day. That's fine. But you cannot let that overly compromise the pacing of your story just because you like somebody or not. So here, I looks like we're getting gotta have that cute heart. You gotta have that cute heart. Absolutely. So it looks like we're getting some precision here. Not roleplay in terms of goofing around, roleplay more in terms of the GM planned this massive quest and I ruined the whole thing by killing one guy and stealing the critical item in 2 minutes just because I wanted to play in character. So if your quest relies on somebody being alive and that person dies, then you have to sort of figure out first, are players playing the way that you want them to play? If you have players who are just like, I'm just going to kill things at random because I think it's funny, and that's not the kind of game you want to play, then that's something you have to deal with out of character. You've got to talk to them about it. Or in character, you have to start really delivering carrot and stick. So carrot and stick is when players do something you like, you reward them. When players do something you don't like, you punish them. It sounds like a horrible way of putting it. I say that every time I describe this method, but dangle the carrot in front of them or hit them with the stick. Awful analogy. I got to think of a better one. But anyway, if players kill somebody and you're like, but I don't want you randomly killing people, you have to punish them. You got to, put them up against somebody who's like, look, I'm taking you to jail because you killed somebody at random. Or you can deal with it out of character. But if somebody does something because that's what their character would do, it's been established, and it messed up your quest, that's kind of something that you're going to have to roll with. You're encouraging people to roleplay. You're encouraging people to play out what they want with their character in a sandbox, as opposed to, again, being on rails. And there are ways to get things back on track. If you kill the person who holds the secret, somebody else now holds the secret, or the secret is no longer important, but you can move forward. The sin here would be to give up. So, biggest gripe I've had with GMing is having to lean on a more experienced player and things spinning out of control. So, experienced player isn't necessarily a player who's willing to look out for the rest of the table. There are definitely times where I've seen a player want to take the game into a place where the other players can't or won't follow. But because they have the most experience, they end up being the leader, the guide, and they move forward. And then you're caught up in it. You need to encourage the mood at the table. This is one thing that I will say. In these videos that were made that kind of have prompted this discussion, one of the repeated comments was that there was an idea that there was a social contract for role-playing, but that for some reason the game master had as part of their role in that social contract making sure that everyone at the table is having a good time. That's not true, in my opinion. Everybody has that responsibility. And it is time that we stopped saying that it is the storyteller who has to take on that responsibility. It should be everyone's responsibility. But yeah, if you lean on an experienced player and that player just decides to take it in a place where no one else can follow, no good. It's not going to help. All right. Well, as long as people keep talking, we'll just deal with what people are saying. We can always go back. My favorite is not Scott. And if it was, I would never tell you. GM said, not making sure the story you're trying to tell is the same as people want and having discussions about that before the campaign, because I think so many problems can be avoided by understanding what players want and expect and what you want and expect. So this is absolutely something that you need to pay attention to. This is why we have things like session zeros, where people say what their expectations are. And when you're discussing what you're playing, figuring out why people want to play that certain thing. This is not just a GM sin. This is an everyone at the table sin. That if you don't make it clear what you want to do, you cannot blame other people when they don't go along with what you want. If you expect that you're going to run a gritty, hard action, less drama, but just a very lethal kind of game, and everyone else wants to play political intrigue, but nobody mentioned that to anybody, then you're at an impasse until you start running the game that you want and everyone else starts resisting. No good. So yeah, talk to each other. Do that. It is a good thing. Number 4 in the first video was GM's Common Resurrections. The idea that characters can come back from the dead easily. This isn't a GM sin, this is a setting sin. I mean, it is a GM sin in that if you Deus Ex Machina somebody alive, then it removes the threat of death. So one thing, you just got to be careful you're not removing the threat of death. 2, death still has to feel like it matters if you want it to in your game. Not every game is going to do that. Some games you can't kill the characters at all, or you just choose not to kill the characters at all, and that's also fine. But the stakes have to be real, and if you present the stakes as real and then immediately turn around and make them so that they are not, you are not doing your game a service. So in that case, yeah. But I would say that this is less about specifically resurrection and more about stakes. If you claim that stakes are a thing in your game, you can't then take it back at a whim without risking the game collapsing. And one of those stakes is if you get hurt enough, you die. Those are stakes. Now, in a game like Celeste, a video game like Celeste, you die and 1.5 seconds later you are alive again. And the only stakes are that you have lost your progress on the screen that you're on. In other games, you die and you lose all your items and you have to start over from the beginning, like roguelikes. Both games are a lot of fun. Both games appeal to a lot of different players, but you have to be sure that that your players know what the stakes are. So yeah, let's see this, because I like it when somebody apologizes for a question before I even had a chance to get to it. Come on. Show the message. There we go. Do you think it is fair to say why everyone has responsibility to have fun? Storytellers different tools at their disposal to aid in enjoyment, gives them different duties and responsibilities. I hope I'm making sense to be interested in your thoughts on that. Yes, it's absolutely fair that it's everyone's responsibility to have fun. However, different people have different responsibilities to make that happen. But everybody is equally responsible for making sure that everybody has fun. The reason why I put it that way is because all too often players show up and they're like, I want to have fun. I want to have my time in the spotlight. I want to be there for everybody. It's great. And then they hog the spotlight, or they ignore the other players at the table, or they ignore when the storyteller is talking, or they do things knowing that the storyteller isn't going to be happy with what's going on. That's no good either. The storyteller definitely has more responsibility placed on them in terms of keeping the game running, but I don't like saying that they have the more responsibility to make sure that everyone has fun. They have more responsibility to make sure the game overall progresses. They have more responsibility, more mental load. They're adjudicating rules. They are definitely set in a different section as players, but it should be everybody's primary goal to make sure that everybody at the table is having fun, including yourself. Absolutely. But while you as a player may not be in the position to adjudicate rules the way that a storyteller can, you are absolutely in the position of paying attention when other people are talking, of thinking about what other players might enjoy at that time and how that might affect what you do so that they get to have that joy. The idea that you might say, oh, well, it would make me happy if I caused some shit and stole other people's items while they're asleep. If other people aren't going to enjoy that, you need to think about why you're doing it. Just because you think something will be fun doesn't mean that everyone will think that it's fun. You do not have to only do things to please other people. You do have a responsibility to please yourself, but everybody must be responsible for making sure that everybody is having fun. Putting all of that responsibility on the GM basically means that when you show up at a game as a player, you are inherently selfish. And I don't think that people want to be inherently selfish. I think everybody wants to show up and have a good time. The best time that you'll have is when everybody is thrilled and everybody is going for it. Similar question. Things like this. I mean, we use safety cards, right? We use safety cards in our games. It's not the storyteller's job to pay attention to these, it's everybody's. So if a player flashes a yellow card, it's not the storyteller who has to be like, okay, everybody, let's listen to this person. Everybody should just shut up and listen to somebody who's flashing the pause card right away, if that's the tool that you're using in a game. If you're using the X card, somebody touches the X card, and it's up to everybody at the table to make it right for that player, not the storyteller. The storyteller having all of that responsibility is ultimately self-defeating for players. So I'd really encourage people to stop thinking in terms of the storyteller's got the job. Everybody has the job. So Osub's putting it in a great way. Communal storytelling implies everyone is responsible and invested in working together to tell the story. You are allowed to advocate for yourself, and you may be your greatest advocate, but you must also pay attention to what everyone else will want to. This is also part of the reason why you get the best stories this way, because then everybody is invested to help everybody. And instead of it being 3 people who are scrambling to reach the top of a mountain, it's 3 people who are helping each other get to the top of a mountain. And then as somebody slips and falls, they're tied to the other 2, so they are caught. And therefore, they don't fall to the bottom. They can get right back on the mountain and continue to climb. This is overall a better way of doing it, because we do not need to think of this in terms of a competition, or even in terms of a solo adventure where there are other people who happen to be involved. It's a very solipsistic way to go through life. I don't necessarily believe that that's a great option. And if you are nervous, Plucky Hero, about running a game and you're worried that other people are going to go out of control, there's nothing wrong with running games where the amount of control that you can lose is minimized, that you can rein in more control. That's fine. Do what makes you comfortable, what you will be happy with. Sin number 3, not knowing your player limit. The idea that you can, that you don't say no when somebody asks to join the game, and therefore you have now too many players. This is definitely something that people need to pay attention to. There are definitely hard limits, and this is something that I've done. I have had people beg me to run a game, and beg and say, like, please run it with 6 people, 6 players plus me. We all really want to play. We really want to play with each other. I was uncomfortable. I said okay anyway, and the game sucked, and it was my fault because I didn't say no, I cannot do a game with 6 people. Or at least that kind of game with 6 people. Doesn't matter how many people really wanted to play. I personally, the style of game that I run, I can't have 6 people sitting at the table plus me, because I tend to focus more on individual storylines, on personal relationships, on characters, doing more in-depth kind of storytelling and role-playing. That in a cast of 6, there are just too many protagonists at that point, and it falls apart. If I was running a LARP, absolutely go for it. That's the perfect time to bring in more players for me, but not on a tabletop. So it is important for you to recognize what your limit is, and your limit may be different than mine. I prefer 3, and I choose to go no higher than 4. You may be like, 4 is great, 5 or 6 is great if I'm running a combat heavy game, 7 or 8 is great if I'm running a LARP. All of that is fine, but you are the one who has to make that determination, and you are the one who has to hold fast to it, because players can't make that decision for you. They can only make the decision for themselves. Requiem puts forward one analogy a storyteller brought up once for communal storytelling was that each player is a kingdom, and in order for that kingdom to survive, it must establish trade routes with the other kingdoms or players. If a kingdom does not establish trade routes, then it would quickly die. I don't know if it would quickly die, but it certainly wouldn't be as prosperous as if it didn't have trade, right? Number 2, not preparing your game. So this included such statements as, and I am paraphrasing, improvisation should never be a GM's primary way to plan a session. Okay. If you do not prepare your game, there are definitely times where this will bite you in the ass. If you are running a game that demands preparation and you choose not to, and you half-ass your way through it, you may be able to get through a couple of sessions that way, but in general, you should do the preparation that you need to do if that is your GM style and that's the kind of game you want to run. I do not agree this is a GM sin. I believe that it is possible to improv your way through an entire game without any issue. It just depends on who you are and what your skills are and what kind of game you're running. I think that in doing so, you are ignoring the fact that your players are also contributing to the story. If the belief is you must only prepare, you cannot rely on improv. I rely on improv because I want to tell the story that my players want. And I get the idea of what my players want through watching them play. So this is the first time in this kind of, in this list where I outright disagree with the statement. I just think that a better sin would be if you know that you need to prep and you do not prep, then you are only hurting yourself in the game. The players are there to hear my story because no one else will listen to my pitch. Listen to our story. This may be our only chance. Is that the line? Fuck, I don't even remember. Fuck, that was like 20 years ago. Fucking Final Fantasy X. Yikes. Anyway. Do I really improv? Do I plan situations or something like that? It depends. Kung Fu Fenders, there are times where I will go in and I'll be like, I don't know what I'm doing this session. Let's see what pans out. And sometimes I'm like, I have ideas of what I want to have happen this session. Let's see what pans out. And sometimes I'll say, this is what I'm going to start with this session. Let's see what pans out. I do not overly prep for most of my sessions. Occasionally, if there's a set piece that I really like, I will prepare it, knowing that I'm always risking that set piece doesn't come up. But would I ever show up to a game with nothing at all prepped? I have. I do more often than I think people recognize, even my own players. But I've also been doing this for a very, very long time. And this is the way that I do things. I worked for several years as an improv comedian, for an in-house at a comedy club. So I've been training for this. I've been training for this moment all my life. So yes, I would absolutely do that. Now, the thing is, when I say nothing prepped, you have to kind of make the decision of what prepped means. I typically know the rules of a game before I start playing. I know the setting. I've talked with my players. I know who their characters are. I know what their backstories are to a certain extent. So, I mean, yes, that's prep. But I will sometimes literally walk into a session being like, I don't know what's going to happen here. I have no plans. But typically I can do this because instead I establish a world with the assistance and with the collaboration of players, and then that world can start acting on its own. And all it needs is a nudge from the players one way or the other, and then it just goes, it takes off. But that's also part of the way that I run characters, and the way that I do that. I can inhabit a character quickly if I need to. Characters have distinct personalities, wants, wishes, needs, hates, loves, but that's part of my training as an actor. So what works for me is not necessarily going to work for you. So I definitely urge people to not half-ass it if you need the time. In much the same way that, look, if you know that you know your stuff backwards and forwards before a test and you don't need to study, great, go for it. You always risk not doing well on the test, but if you know it, you don't have to study, just go. And there are some people who will be like, no, I know that I have to study before a test, but I choose not to. I hope that I'll make my way through it. I hope that I'll muddle through. You can do it, but you're taking a risk. So you just got to be careful along those ways. Aravana is posting about the Exalted Essence Kickstarter. Yep, absolutely. Already funded, already got through the first set of stretch goals. Yeah, so spontaneously creating NPCs, I can and I do if I need to. It's just, if I'm going into it with no plan at all, it's better to have a world established so that if players are like, well, I'm going to go see this person, I can say, great, yeah, you can see that person. But I would never try to show up to a game where players are like, okay, we're going to start. And I'm like, great, let's start. I got nothing. Although I could probably come up with something at that point on, like, off the top of my head. Again, years of practice and not that being my preferred way of doing things. Remember, I would be a great GM for some of you and I'd be a terrible GM for others. Like, I have very little interest, for instance, in miniature play. I'm not the kind of person who wants to spend a whole lot of time coming up with different battle scenarios at this point in my life. Previously I have, maybe in the future I will, but like, if you're the kind of person who's like, I really, really, really want to play a whole bunch of like wargaming, I'm not the guy for you. And those also typically take more prep than I'm willing to put in. So that happens. But for some people, I would do great for you, because if you're somebody who really likes storytelling and really likes role playing and are like interested in mechanics, but the kind of mechanics that I work well with, then fantastic. But it is important to note that just because I do something doesn't mean it's right. Just because I believe in something doesn't mean that it is correct. And just because I know what works for me doesn't mean that it won't work for you, or that it will work for you. So, yeah, exactly. There are many different styles to play, and all of them are okay. You just need to find yours. So not all of them are okay, in my opinion. There are certain things that are not okay. If your style of play is inherently selfish, then perhaps you should not be playing with others. If your style of play is harmful to other people, you shouldn't do that. But in general, yeah, like if you know what kind of game you prefer playing, what kind of game you're good at playing, that's what you should do. You just need to find it, and then also find players who are compatible with that. So Luke, what you're talking about here, we've discussed before. When I do that, what people call the jonologue, that's me transitioning the magic circle. That is exactly what you're saying. It's everybody settle down. It's time to get into game. It's one of the things as part of the ritual to help people into a game. I do the same thing when it's time to move out of the game. It also explains why I wear the same thing when I game each day, or when I'm running a game. I wear the same thing, not because I'm like, well, I just like this jacket a whole lot. It's because when I wear it, it puts people in the right mindset and reminds me of what I have to do. If you are selfish, play a solo RPG. Yep, there are plenty out there. Go and find them. They'll be fun. Enjoy. I have a mix of prep and improv. Some things I prep, like BBEGs and how they're interacting with the world, and I improv all the scenarios the players get into because I cannot play that far ahead. You do the amount of prep that you feel comfortable with. You do the amount of improv you feel comfortable with, but just make sure that you understand what you are comfortable with. So moving on from this topic, we're going to move on. So this video's number one GM sin is forgetting to have fun. This is a problem. this is kind of equivalent to the idea that everybody at the table should be making sure that everybody is having fun. Storytellers often put way too much pressure on themselves and therefore forget to have fun themselves. Or in trying to make sure that every player is happy, deliberately makes choices that they know will not make themselves happy. You got to cut that out. You just got to cut it out. You have to be able to make sure that you're happy. In fact, this is what I will tell you. If you know you're not happy, eventually no one will be happy because your players will suffer. They might not be obvious right away, but they will suffer. Plus, they will also, if they are your friends, which I certainly hope that they are, they wouldn't want you to suffer. So if you go through the whole thing and you are absolutely miserable, it's no good. When we were running Star Wars, I was miserable at a certain point. I was like, this is not working for me. I am not having as good a time as I want. I am struggling with this kind of game. I'm not happy. And other players were probably more likely to want to keep going, but they didn't, knowing that I was as unhappy as I was. And that ended up being for the best for everyone. Because if they had said, well, let's see if we can make it to 25 episodes, and I was already done at like episode 6, then by episode 15, I would just be checking out. I wouldn't care. Or worse, I would just be miserable and quit. So you do have to be able to put your own needs first sometimes, because you're the only one who knows your needs better than anyone else. Kung Fu Fenris, yeah, I'm not going to pretend. Like, me and that system did not get along. I was not enjoying it. So it's kind of the way it is. It wasn't even just that. There were other elements. I failed to secure motivations for my players. I failed to realize that they kind of were like, we don't really feel attachments to anything. And I was, like, there were a lot of mistakes that I made. The game didn't work out. It's fine. It looked like I was a cat getting a bath. Fair. I wonder how much of that is in retrospect, because if you noticed that in session 2, why didn't you say something? But yeah, I'm trying to be as open and honest as I can be, because this is evidence of one of my many failures. It's okay to fuck up, but I recognized that I wasn't having fun. After a while, I recognized that I probably wasn't going to be able to fix it. And then my players accepted that and we moved forward. And I think that it ended up being for the best for all of us. So that's what we have. Oh yeah, it's not about destiny points. It was just me not liking the entire system and having issues with how the game was progressing. Requiem says, I will say that on occasion, all players make self-sacrifices to let other players have fun. So long as the small sacrifices are not so unfun that it destroys the game. I have sacrificed fun to let others have their fun, but I do it sparingly, and I generally look for a compromise rather than make that sacrifice. You can't think of it in terms of sacrifices all the time. You need to think of it in terms of just because I would benefit the most from this right now doesn't mean that it is the best option. A sacrifice is a dangerous way to put it, because saying things like, I sacrificed my time in the spotlight so someone else could have it, it's not necessarily a sacrifice. The spotlight isn't yours to give up. It is everybody's, and you just decided not to hog it. But if you're like, well, I had a shitty time this game, but at least somebody else had a good time, then you are ignoring the rule of everybody should be having a good time because you are not having a good time. It'll happen. You can't expect every game to be perfect and every session to be perfect. It'll definitely happen that sometimes it's just not going to be great for you. But you can't think of it in terms of like, yep, sometimes suck's gotta suck because that's the only way that other people are going to have fun. That means you shouldn't be in the game at all. If the only way that other people can enjoy themselves is by you suffering, don't play. I know that's not quite what you're saying, Requiem, but it's it is just poor choice of words. I get it. But the reason I put it that way is because I have seen people do the whole like noble, I will sacrifice for the good of everyone else. I might be miserable, but at least they'll be having fun. Don't do that. Just don't. It's okay to be like, I have issues, but we're going to talk about it at the end of game and we'll just get through the next kind of hour or whatever. Fine. But you should not be thinking that your sacrifice is necessary. It's okay to fuck up. Frame this for all eternity. This is something that I have noticed, that people often say that it's okay for everyone else to fuck up except themselves, right? Like, oh, my players fuck up? Sure, whatever. Like, no big deal. I fuck up? I'm the worst. I'm the worst. No, it's okay for you to fuck up too. I was not happy. I was losing sleep over this game. I was dreading Sundays. I was like, I don't see a way to fix this, because as much as I feel like I could fix it for the players, I won't be happy. And I hated telling my players that. Eventually I was like, look, folks, I've tried, but I'm miserable. And here are the things that are making me miserable. And we talked about it and came to the conclusion that like this was an endemic system problem, not a, we can just correct course and do this. There were a bunch of little things that were happening, but I had to come to terms with also being able to be like, I fucked up. I was the one who originally suggested the game. I was the one who was, I made the pitch for it. I fucked up. And if I hid that from the audience, then that would be bad too. I'm still happy with the campaign that we played. I still think that overall it was good that we did it, because I think that we should be allowed to do things that are slightly outside our comfort zone, even if they don't work out. And people didn't like tune out in droves, and people didn't hate the fact that we played a different game, and the players had fun for the sessions that we played. And there were moments that I was enjoying myself. That's true. So I'm not upset that it happened, but I did have to admit, fucked up. You learn more from your mistakes than your successes. You learn more from your own self-analysis. would be what I would say. So, or do what I did and admit the whole RPG experience felt like an obligation to leave the game because it's not for you. Yep. If it feels like an obligation, you shouldn't be doing it. A role-playing game is for fun. If you were doing it to get paid, there you go. My current job, quite literally, is to tell a story that I am obligated to tell because I'm being paid for it. Is it the game that I would want to play first and foremost? Probably not. Is it the story that I would want to tell first and foremost? No. But I'm getting paid to do it, so I have an obligation. And that's work, right? Look, when people say things like, get a job doing what you do best, or get a job doing what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, is bullshit. It's still work, right? Even the jobs that I've loved the most in my life is still work. You will have days that you come home and you're like, man, fuck this. It's the way it goes. If work was amazing all the time, we'd do it for free. But am I referring to Exalted or something else? My job, Plucky Hero, is I am a narrative and game designer for video games. And the game project that I'm working on currently is for a game that would not be in my typical player rotation. And the story that I'm telling is not the one that would interest me the most. But I do it because that's the project that I'm working on. And I can still be proud of the work that I'm doing. I can still think that it's a good game, even if it's not a game that I am currently would choose to play. But the nature of my work is that I get paid. But if you're playing in a role-playing game, you're not getting paid. So you shouldn't do it out of a sense of obligation. With every skill, you are going to spend time not being good at something before you get good at something in general, right? And it's okay to sort of be like, well, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm going to keep trying because I'm getting better at it. That is true. And like I said, there are going to be some days that you're going to be like, man, that game just did not go well for me, or I just didn't have as much fun as I'd hoped. That's okay. And that doesn't mean that the game is a loss, and it doesn't mean that you should give up the hobby forever after one bad game. But if you're finding that when you show up, you don't really want to be there, you shouldn't be there. There are GMs for hire. Not sure I'd ruin the fun by making it a job. I will say that running a game as a job is a lot different than running a game for fun. It is not the same thing. They have similar skill sets, perhaps in some respects, overlapping skill sets, I should say, because they're not like, it's not a perfect circle. It is a Venn diagram. But it's tough. When you are telling stories for somebody else on somebody else's dime, you've got to be happy with doing things their way, not yours. No longer is the directive, I must make sure that everyone at the table, including myself, is having fun. The directive is, I must make sure that the people paying me are having fun. Or you have to pick your clients very well. So it's not as easy as all that. So it is difficult. I also have very little idea, just in terms of like, if you are running games for other people, I have a little idea how much that's a feasible career. If you're like a prep GM, or if you're running a game for people and they're paying you, they may expect a certain amount of preparation for it. Would you be able to put in, say, a 40-hour work week and make a salary that you feel is what you earn and deserve? It's a good question. Because there are people out there who could be very happy with basically living like at a certain level, and saying like, well, at least I'm only doing what I want to do. I'm only running games, and that's fine. But I'm working 80 hours a week for less money than I would get minimum wage. And some people are happy for that, and some people are not. So it's just kind of the trade-off and balance that you'd have to find. If somebody came out to me and said, I'll pay you $400,000 a year to run a game for me, and it'll be your full-time job, okay, I'll fucking do it. For that much money, sure. But it is difficult. It is difficult to recognize that. Part of the reason why I have a job where that I have now is because I get paid to do what my job is, and then I can put it down at the end of the day. So, most times. The Canefile has a good perspective on it. Drew for fun for years, started doing it as a job not that long ago, and as much as I'm really enjoying it, it is totally not the same. Some commissions can be like, ugh, and I can't ever just not finish or say, yeah, it's not great, but it'll do. There's a lot more pressure on you when somebody is paying you for the work. Or you have to disassociate that part of your brain and say, it's not great, but it'll do. That's one of the things that I've had to do at my job over various parts of my career, is saying, this isn't good, but I don't have the support to do what I would consider good, or the time or the resources. So I have to put forward what I can, knowing that that's what's going to make it. That's what's going to be available. And that really sucks sometimes, but sometimes that's what you got to do. Most times. I mean, Felipe. So here's an interesting question. I might need to parse this a little bit, Plucky Hero. Well, Felipe, at this point, here's the thing. I would put in more time if I was allowed, if I felt like I was going to get paid for it. And if I'm not getting paid for it, I'm not doing it. That's not fair to me or anyone else. Because the other thing is, I can put in extra time and then show up and they'll be like, yeah, but we can't do it anyway. Okay, well then I put in extra time for nothing and I'm not getting paid. So I imagine, Plucky Hero, that what you're asking is what would the price or charity donation be to entice me to run another game stream content? Okay, so the games that we run for RPG Clinic, very specifically, because this is kind of like an important distinction for here, we do it because we want to, and it's our hobby. We're not doing this for money. We're not doing this for professional gain. While it does dovetail into our professional interests in a certain way, storytelling, performing, technical work, learning how to stream, learning how to do better, like all of this is still useful for us for our careers, but we're not doing this for our careers. We're doing it because we want to play a game and we think it's fun to do so in a way that other people get to join in. The donations and subscriptions and bits that we've received have gone back into equipment to help make the game better. Equipment like our audio interfaces, our microphones, our lights, our cameras, our furniture, the computer from which we stream, which is now a laptop as opposed to a desktop, because we needed to do that at a certain point in order to maintain our ability to stream properly during COVID. All of that stuff has been covered by the donations made to the stream, which is wonderful and stuff that we love. If you asked me to run another game, then I'd be losing out on even more of my free time. And my free time is valuable because I can't only spend time either at work or streaming. That would be pretty difficult for me, which means that it would probably cost more than anybody who could reasonably be expected to pay. If we wanted to, if we were really interested in it, we'd be doing things differently if we were like trying to push for partner. If we were trying to push for partner, if we were trying to become like, this is our career on Twitch, we'd be doing things a lot differently. It would be a much greater risk. I don't think we would make it. And it's not because I don't think that we have the skills. I think it's just because the people who can make it role-playing on Twitch these days in general are celebrities in other ways. And that's natural, right? I'm not saying that we couldn't, but also we'd have to start thinking about marketing. We'd have to start thinking about like, well, we can't play at our current time because our time is not convenient for a lot of our audience. Sunday evenings are convenient for us. In the theater world, generally, you do not have plays Sunday evening, which means that for Kate and Elizabeth and Scott, they're most likely not going to be working on a Sunday evening, which means that that's the best day for us to do it, because they are very likely to be working on a Saturday evening or a Saturday afternoon or a Friday afternoon or whatever, because we also want to make sure that we play consistently. We don't want to get into a situation where, say, Kate gets booked to stage manage a show and realizes that, okay, she can't play with us for the next 4 weeks because there are rehearsals and show times when our normal stream would be happening. So we play Sunday evenings because that's when we can guarantee it. You do not have to be sorry. I'm just explaining the way things are. You're asking a question. You're not implying that I should be doing things. So we'd have to stream more regularly. We'd have to stream with more content. So clinic hours, the show that we're doing here, I can't take time to prepare for clinic hours that much right now. And if I did, then that's more of my free time that I'd have to give up. So the idea that how much it would be for a new streamed game, there was a time where I was running 2 streamed games at once. I was running Changeling the Streaming on Sundays, and then I was running Full Party on another channel, on Beanduck's channel on Mondays. And I don't think that's sustainable for me at this point in time. I wouldn't necessarily say that it wouldn't ever happen again, but it just isn't sustainable for me at this point in time because there's already a lot of effort being put into the streams that we do, and I don't necessarily want to jeopardize that. If I was, like, for instance, if I was running another stream, clinic hours, I'd probably have to chuck, like, right away. I'd have to find players who'd be willing to do that, players who could be willing to commit to a certain time, and then I'd have to prepare that game as well. So you could also make the case that, like, I would absolutely do it if it meant I would run 3 games a week, 4 games a week, if it meant that I could quit my job and have a steady income and have a reliable income that was similar to the salary that I'm making now or better, then I would do it. But I can't guarantee that. And I'm not willing to take that risk. Not at this point in time. It is, now we'll get the sad music to play while I'm talking about that. It would be nice. I'm absolutely not ruling it out. But right now it's not feasible. I'll also point out that we have other ideas of what we want to do with this channel. And we're not against increasing our viewership, but we're just not focusing on it. Like, I know that can seem strange, but you only have 19 viewers currently in your channel right now. Is that enough? And I'm like, yeah, it's totally fine. I'd be annoyed if it was, 1 viewer. Then I would sort of feel like, am I wasting everybody's time? Because this stream especially is better when I have people who are participating, who are speaking in chat, who are giving their opinions. Because otherwise you're literally just sitting here watching me yammer for 2 hours, and that's no fun. Don't say only. I mean, look, we're also lucky. The vast majority of streamers on Twitch never get an audience at all. They get only the very occasional person tuning in, and that person tends to know them personally, and then that's it. I've known people who are very talented who tried to stream and just could not get off the ground. And they really wanted to make a career out of it, but they couldn't get off the ground. It takes a lot of work. And it takes a bit of luck. Or a lot of luck. So it's okay. Here's what I would say, Plucky Hero, because if you're saying things like this was born out of the unrealistic chance that if you won the lottery, you would support people's content who I love. See, that's being a patron of the arts. That's fantastic. And I'm telling you that if you could afford to pay my salary, I would spend 40 hours a week running a game for people on Twitch and doing preparations for it and making sure that it was a big deal and putting the effort into the marketing and all that. You'd also have to end up not just doing that for me, but for everyone else involved as well. A lot of the work of this goes to the other people at RPGClinic. That's part of the reason why we shifted the game off from my private channel to a channel that kind of represented all 4 of us, because I'm not the only one doing the work. I'm not the only one putting in for it. There's a lot of people who are involved in making sure that this is good. And everybody is currently working on a volunteer basis. Every single one. Our mods are volunteers. The graphics, that the overlays that you see, Aragorn works on those overlays. We upload to YouTube, we upload to Anchor for podcasts. We reach out to various forums. We reach out to Onyx Path to let them know when we're playing. The thumbnails that are created, all of this stuff, it's all work that we all have to do. Imagine Ubi. Yeah. Right. It would be like producing a television series. Absolutely. And that's also part of the reason why you're not seeing LARP Season 3 right now. When people ask us what it would take to see LARP Season 3, my answer is more money than you think. Because in general, they start asking where that money needs to go. If we want to make LARP Season 3 the way that we would want to make it, it will cost us... let's assume that we're making a show similar in scope to Season 2 with a little... we always want to do better. So let's say that we're doing a little bit better, but we're still only shooting 10 episodes of 12 minutes each with maybe a long-term finale. It would cost us $500,000. And that's a fuck ton of money for a show that does not have that many views. It's a lot. So you would have to find a lot of people who'd be really interested in donating to see it happen, which is why it's not currently off the table yet, but we can't do it for less than that. $500,000 is kind of the minimum, because to do that, it involves a ton of work from a lot of people who deserve to get paid. LARP Season 1, almost nobody got paid. The money it cost a lot less than Season 2, but that was money that came directly out of pocket from the filmmakers, not me, I should point out, from Beanduck. It was Beanduck's investment, and just for the sake of clarity, I am not part of Beanduck. I worked with Beanduck for this. They funded it basically as an investment for themselves, but the only person who got paid was the sound re-recorder and mixer, because we needed help getting the sound to sound proper, right? He was the only one who got paid for that. Season 2, we said we're going to pay everybody. We're absolutely going to pay everybody. And we did. We paid the actors. We paid them a negotiated rate because they're all union actors, but we paid them a negotiated rate. We paid everybody else. We did not pay them what they were worth. We paid them what we could afford. It was still important for us that we could pay them at least what, like a semi-reasonable wage. But is this something that's on our YouTube? LARPs is a web series that can currently be found either on Geek and Sundry's YouTube page. You can find it on Amazon Prime in several countries. In France, it's on a different streaming service that I don't remember off the top of my head. And in absolutely. It is. But yeah, you can find it on basically if you search LARPs, LARPS on YouTube, you'll find it. There are 2 seasons. The first season is less quality than the second season just because, again, the money. We could afford it. But the problem with the second season is that we didn't pay the people who did the most work on it. We didn't pay the director. We didn't pay the writer. We didn't pay the producers. They didn't see a dime because we couldn't afford to pay them. And we can't do that anymore. I have a mortgage to pay, folks. I have bills that I got to pay. I have expenses, and I cannot afford to spend a year of my life or more working on that for nothing anymore. I just can't. I wish I could, but I can't. And so and it's the same kind of thing where, thank you, Aravana. And I will also point out that it is a labor of love for us. I would probably accept less money than I'm making now to make LARPs. That's like for sure. But I also just have to be responsible and realize that, like, you know, I gotta live my life, and so does everybody else. And maybe also it's time for a new project. Who knows, right? But to get back to like the core of it, Plucky Hero, what you were saying, if somebody paid me to run a Twitch stream, then I would be much more likely to do it. But unfortunately, you wouldn't just have to pay me. You'd have to pay me, and you'd have to pay everybody else involved. That costs money, and it's money that currently I don't think anybody has to give us. If we got partnered by Twitch, maybe we'd be able to afford it. If we had thousands of viewers, maybe we'd be able to afford it. But that would be a different experience as well. One of the things that we really like when we're role-playing is that we can read chat as it's going by. We can interact with our audience on a personal level on our Discord. We can make connections and involve people to a higher degree. If you're Critical Role, you can't do that. They used to have chat on screen. Now they can't. They're just way too big. It changes the experience. That's not necessarily a change that we wouldn't want to do, but it's not necessarily a change that we want either. So, it is a thing that we just have to pay attention to. But we also got lucky, right? LARP Season 1 got put out, then it was discovered by Felicia Day because of a Google alert, because of an article that was written about us that compared us to her web series, The Guild. We got brought on, everything was great, and then right when we were going to air, Geek and Sundry essentially got bought out by Legendary Pictures, and they didn't want to do scripted content anymore, or they didn't want to do content on some unknown Canadians, and instead were focusing on trying to leverage Will Wheaton as best they could. There's a reason why Felicia Day isn't part of Geek and Sundry anymore. There's a reason Will Wheaton doesn't do tabletop anymore. There's lots of it. So, you know, we were lucky, and then we also got unlucky. It was our big break, and then it wasn't our big break. So, yeah, we've got other things to worry about too. We gotta, like, the people at Beanduck have done other projects. They can they can very well, they've got their own offices now. They've got their own services that they have available. It's fantastic. Like, they've done stuff with what they've done. I have parlayed my work in LARPs into a career, which I'm happy with right now as well. So, that's kind of I'm happy where I am right now. Which means that if I run a second campaign, it's going to be because I want to run a second campaign online. If it's about like how much money it would cost or how much charity it would have to be, that's a way different question. And unfortunately, the answer is probably not enough that people would be able to give, because I would have to start working less in other areas. Because as weird as it is, I love role-playing, but I don't want to spend all my time doing it. All my free time doing it anyway. So that's that. Hopefully that's a long diatribe for probably not enough, but it is the unfortunate thing. The people who are creating the art that you love often are not getting the support you think they are. It is just I need my Netrunner and board game time too. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. But it is amazing these days that as much as I feel like I've had some success in these areas and that I've parlayed it into a career, the only money I've ever seen off LARPs was as an actor and not as a creator. And the only reason I got paid as an actor was because I'm part of the union. And so if you want me to act in your thing, you have to pay me, especially if other people are getting paid. So it is what it is. Perhaps, Luke, I'm not making a claim for everybody. I'm making a claim for myself. I just can't do one thing. So let's move back on to GM sins, unless there's other further questions about this. I'm going to continue with the sins. If other people do want to keep talking about this, I'm happy to. But just pay attention to the art and the artists out there, and also recognize that you have no obligation to them, right? Other than like try not to pirate their shit, but you don't have to give anybody money. To be here, we don't gatekeep any of our content. There's nothing. If you're a subscriber, you get to access our emotes and you support us, and we are absolutely thrilled for that. And your support keeps us going in terms of the equipment that we need and stuff like that. But we're not going to do something where like, well, you can't watch us unless you subscribe, or we won't talk to you unless you donate a certain amount each month. Like, absolutely not. You have no obligation to us, but in exchange, we have no obligation to you, which is kind of how parasocial relationships work. It's very kind, Luke, but you got to tell Beanduck that I'm, again, not me. Sin more. So here we go. Second video, number 7, too rigid to the rules. Yep. You can't be too rigid to the rules, unless you want to be rigid to the rules, but every single rulebook out there says, if you want to change something, change it. So it's in the rules. If you are being so inflexible as to say, you can't do this because it is not covered by the rules, then that can be an issue. So I would call this instead, as a GM sin, being inflexible. Number 6, not knowing the rules. So in the video, he made a really big deal about like how it's your responsibility and your homework to know the rules. You have to make sure that you've done the work before you show up. I would argue that it's not like that. I would just say that you're going to have a better time, and everyone is going to have a better time if you know that you know the rules, because you're also the adjudicator of the rules, typically, if you are a GM. So have that in you. That's kind of important. Number 5, too eager to assist. The idea that if your players are struggling, you just give them all the answers. Delicate situation. You definitely don't want your players to feel hopeless, but yes, players typically like to figure things out. I would argue that I would add a sin in here, a sin that was not covered on their list, which I absolutely think should be there, is avoid needing to be mysterious all the time. There's probably a better way of putting it. I see commonly people who, if somebody guesses what their mystery is, they change it because they want to feel like they're always one step ahead of the players. They always want their players to have that moment of, I can't believe it, or I never saw that coming. You got to sometimes have your players have a win. Be like, I suspected something, and boom, there it is. All the time, you're predictable. None of the time, your players may as well not even try to figure things out. This is also why when I see audience talking about the game and coming up with conjecture and theories about what's happening, it's great. Sometimes you get it right on. Sometimes you are way the fuck off. And sometimes you say something that I find so interesting that I start wondering whether I can change things to make that happen. But I never will say, oh, somebody figured me out, so I'm not going to do it. That's not fair. That's entirely not fair. It is a dangerous road to go down, because then nobody wants to discuss anything with you ever. and you'll start seeing it if you start having players who will refuse to talk to you except during game time. That's a sign that they feel like if they talk to you, then it's a danger. Well, Pukajutsu, it's not like Exalted Essence isn't the perfect product for you. Anyway, but yeah, you shouldn't be too eager to assist. You've got to let people figure some things out on their own. But as a counterpoint, you should never, ever be so opaque that nobody can guess what you're doing. Being murder happy, too eager to kill PCs. Yeah, killing a PC is something that can be great if it's the kind of game that you want to run. Paranoia, I'll kill a PC every 5 minutes if I want to. I'll kill every PC every 5 minutes if I want to. I'll kill every PC every 5 seconds if I want to. That's part of the game. That's part of why it's fun. But killing a PC, I believe, is a big deal. And I'm not saying that it's not something that shouldn't happen or even should happen relatively often depending on the game that you're playing. But understand that when you kill a player, you are ending something. You may also be beginning something, but you're definitely ending something. And doing so indiscriminately can be dangerous. How did you know I had the Kickstarter page open? Pook, it's because I love you. Letting players push them around. So this has been brought up earlier by Plucky Hero. Yeah, you definitely should not let players bully you into doing what you think is correct. You are there as a referee as well. So you are there to help build the world. You are there to help direct the pacing. You are there to help give your players a fantastic story skeleton that they can flesh out. You are also there to be a referee. You are adjudicating. And not just mechanics and rules, but also story, right? If somebody says, I pull my sword and I cut the wall in half, you are within your rights to say, you cannot cut a wall in half with this sword. You're not strong enough. The sword's not sharp enough. The wall's too strong. This isn't that kind of game. That's adjudicating as well. And the reason why there is a game master in a lot of these games, the reason why this sort of position exists is because if everybody has an equal say in what happens, oftentimes it gets too chaotic. It's why we have rules for role-playing games. So if you essentially are letting other people adjudicate for you all the time, then you are not doing your job. People are allowed to object and push back against things and try to make you see reason. That's fine. But you cannot basically let them do it whenever they want, because then they should just be the GM. I very rarely kill PCs. Dice kill PCs. I don't even like having dice kill PCs. I don't like killing PCs that often. I will, and I definitely keep the threat of it present. Because I also would make it clear that if I kill a PC, that PC is dead. I don't go in for resurrections. So my players at least can still fear it, but I don't like killing PCs because that's kind of like, well, that's the end of that. Commitment issues. So the idea that storytellers are always looking for the next game to play, so they do not commit to a game. They're like, oh yeah, we're playing this game, but there's another game that I would rather play instead, so let's do that instead. This is something that isn't actually unique to storytellers. This is everybody. But there is something to be said about committing to something and seeing it through. There's an old storytelling adage, which is an entertainment adage as well, which is leave them wanting more. And I believe that. I definitely think that people err on the side of playing too long than playing too short. And then all too often that means that the game never gets a proper ending, either because it gets run into the ground and everyone's kind of sick of it, or the game ends due to other outside circumstances, and so therefore never finds an ending. But this is a dangerous thing to just instantly be like, oh, something new, I want to do that instead. Close out a game if you can. If it's working for you and if you're enjoying it and everyone else is enjoying it, then it deserves an ending. But I would say that this is a problem for everybody, right? Somebody comes along and says, oh, there's something new and shiny. And it's very tempting to do something new and shiny. We're dealing with that right now with Exalted Essence. We have to make a very careful decision. Do we want to continue playing the game that we're playing now? Do we want to convert it? Or do we want to start something new? And we have to make that choice because it's not an obvious one. And we're going to make the choice, honestly, that we feel will be the most fun for us. But it's not a guarantee that we're just like, Essence is coming out, fuck, we're doing Essence now, because that might not necessarily be what would be fun for us. So there is that to keep in mind. My next Exalted Essence character, by the way, just for you, let's see what it's going to be. Let's click on this. I am Last Obelisk. I'm a castless lunar. My major virtue is ambition. My minor virtue is compassion. And my primary approach to things relies on finesse. There you go. So yeah, that's why we have seasons, right? But like, if we don't play Essence for the next thing, we might play Essence for the following campaign, right? Like all of this is stuff that we will take care of. And the number one issue in the second video, the number one sin is never scheduling the game. I completely disagree with this. I think this is a sin for the entire group. I do not agree that the storyteller or game master is the one responsible for scheduling a game. Period. I think that somebody might need to be responsible for it, but I don't think that that should necessarily fall on the storyteller. The way that his videos are presented, and this is his opinion, and that's totally fine for him, is that the storyteller essentially does everything except be a player. They're the one who organizes, they're the one who gets the rules, who knows the rules, they're the ones who does the scheduling, they're the ones who blah, 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 and I don't agree with that. I actually, as one of my stipulations now when I run games, typically, is I will run a game, but I will not schedule it. You have to figure out the scheduling. I don't do that anymore because it used to be the thing that I'd have to do and I hated it and I don't want to do it. So I will work with other people to schedule a game, but I will not be the person who chases everybody down to make sure that the next game can happen. Basically, I know that I'm in demand enough that if you want me, you have to make the effort to get me, which seems a little arrogant, and maybe it is, but that's not my job. That's absolutely fucking not my job to schedule games. That's a job that has to be taken care of. It is a sin to not schedule a game, but my argument would be that the sin is to not commit to a game. If you want to play in a game, the older that you get, you have to find a time to play it and commit to it and treat it as an activity that you cannot easily break. If real life gets in the way for us on a Sunday, then that's fine. They don't show up. There's plenty of times where we've been playing a game where somebody can't make it, so I run with only 2 players, or even with 1 player. It happens, but we do it very rarely because we essentially are like, Sunday evenings are blocked off for this. If it's a work obligation, we'll do work because that real life has to come first. But if someone's like, hey, do you want to hang out on Sunday? You want to like go see a movie? The answer is no. We have something to do on Sundays. I'll go see a movie with you any other day of the week, but not Sunday evenings. This is the sin that I think that people need to pay attention to. Not being willing to commit to a time. And then once the time is committed, not treating it like a commitment. You have to treat it like a commitment because games get better if you actually get to play them when you're supposed to play them. If you get to look forward to them. Especially a lot of games get better if you get to play them more often because you don't forget 90% of the things that happen between games. So there's that as well. So yeah. Schedule the game. There was a third video. We're moving through them faster now because we got 20 minutes left, but that doesn't mean that you can't throw in your opinions or your own sins or even just ask regular questions. I don't care if I get through this entire list. So number 7 on the third video is loot fairy, giving too much treasure to players. Yeah, this is a balance question, and this is also a narrative pacing question. Reward players too much and the rewards stop feeling good. Same as punish players too much and the punishments stop mattering. Excess is bad. And if you give them too much treasure, then also individual pieces of treasure stop mattering. You basically just take the most powerful and everything else gets discarded. You don't get a personal relationship with the treasure. But also, if you give too much treasure, then by that nature, it becomes an arms race and you have to make everything else harder. Otherwise, the game just becomes too easy. Obvious object. So this is when a GM holds something back that should be obvious to the player. So the example that he used was you see a set of keys on the table and you see a whole bunch of other things in the room, and the players spend an hour trying to figure out what to do next in the room. And then it's like, well, okay, well, you missed it. And it turns out it's because the keys that were on the table were car keys. And the players are like, well, that should have been obvious. Car keys look different than normal house keys. We thought that these were keys to because they were picking up the key and trying them in the door, and the GM's like, this key doesn't fit in that door, but not saying that's because these will never fit in that door. You would know that these are car keys. You're not being obvious about it. So, it is, you have to accept that your players are operating under limited information at all times because you are the one who holds the information. And this is something easy to fix. If you forget to mention something obvious, mention it as soon as you realize it. Do not be embarrassed by it. Apologize. Oops, I'm sorry. I forgot to mention they're car keys. Whatever. Have a good night, Kung Fu Fenris, and dream of essence. Number 5, not throwing a bone. So this is that if the players are stalled out, the storyteller doesn't help them. This could be because they missed a very important clue, and now that they don't have the clue, they can't progress because the mystery is unsolved. This could be there was one person who could help them defeat the evil, and that person is dead because of another reason. And therefore, you can't progress. If your players are blocked, if they're truly blocked, either because they can't figure it out or because they have you've painted them into a corner, then yes, it is your responsibility to help them get out of it. Getting out of it doesn't necessarily mean giving them success, but you should be able to keep the game moving. And that you also have to do that in such a way that it doesn't feel like the players are like, well, that really sucked for us. We weren't part of the solution, or everything blew up and everything's miserable and we were supposed to be able to stop it and we didn't, and now we just feel awful. There's ways to balance this, but in general, yeah, if your players are stuck, unstick them. Favoritism. We've covered favoritism. I have seen other people do it. I have done it myself. I distinctly remember at one point when I was running a campaign that I was running side sessions. I offered basically anytime somebody wanted to run a side session with me, they could. They just had to hit me up on ICQ. Remember ICQ? And one player did. And I was like, yeah, you're really engaged with the game. That's great. We can keep playing. This is fantastic. I'm really enjoying it. And then I started noticing that I was giving that player like more storylines, more experience, more like just because I was like, this person deserves it. They're putting so much into the game. But I was showing favoritism. Other people couldn't play, right? They just didn't have the time. And it wasn't correct to assume that. And even if they couldn't, that doesn't mean that then they should be relegated to second tier status just because they weren't my favorite. So don't play favorites. Not reading the room. You should be paying attention to everybody in the room, but so should everybody else. You see somebody who looks bored, angry, frightened, unsafe. You should be paying attention to that, and you should not necessarily rely on somebody to tell you when they are not happy. As much as we have safety cards, sometimes people won't use them, and it might not be a safety issue. It might just straight up be a boredom issue. But yeah, you should be able to read the room if you can. This is not easy for everybody. This is a talent or a skill, and not everybody is able to read others' emotions as easily. That doesn't mean that you can't check in with them every once in a while. Hey, everybody having fun? Cool. And even if it's, hey, everybody having fun, also make sure that you've encouraged an environment in which it is acceptable to say yes or no, instead of just telling you the answer that you want to hear. So yeah, reading the room isn't necessarily a skill that is easy for all. It is something that you can practice and that you can learn, but there are also shortcuts. You don't have to be surreptitious about it. You can be blatant or obvious. No consequences. So no consequences is the idea that, like I said earlier, the idea of no stakes. You encounter the big bad. The big bad fires a fireball at all of you. It does 1 point of damage. You're all fine. You kick its ass. Everything's great. Or you murder the king and everyone just looks around and they're like, well, I guess that's fine. He was kind of a bad dude anyway. If your players can do anything they want and there's never a risk, if there's never any stakes, then there's no drama. And without drama, there isn't a compelling story. Even comedy needs drama. So consequences have to be real. They do not have to be high. They just have to be real. You can have a very tense game about whether or not somebody manages to score a goal on the big game, in which case lives aren't in the balance. The world won't crumble. Governments will not topple if you do not score this goal, but the stakes have to be real. If the answer is, oh, you're playing in this game, yeah, you scored the goal because why not? Well, then no drama. And the number one sin is forgetting that life happens. Yes, but this is also a sin for everybody, not just a storyteller. Sometimes real life happens, and that means an interruption or disruption to your game. Sucks. Absolutely sucks. But that's life. You just have to put up with it. You just have to deal with it. It's life. Somebody can't make a game because, because they have work that was scheduled. You've got to be okay with that. Somebody decides to leave your game because they're moving away or they're not having fun or they would rather be playing a different game. It's life. You got to put up with it. It's okay. That's fine. That's not an excuse to, whoa, I've got the sun coming into my face if I lean forward. See, that's the one like crack in my curtains that's screwing up the lighting. So I got to be careful about that for the next little bit. We're almost done. So let's just keep that in mind going forward. It is a game. And as much as you have to put some responsibility into it, as much as you have to try to make the game work properly, as much as it is something that you should schedule, that you should make an effort to make everybody have a good time, that you should have safety tools, and all of that. It is a game, and other things will be more important than the game. That is life, and your life does have to come first. If nothing else, if there's anything that every bit of media ever tells you about role-playing, both the good and the bad, both the ones that are mocking of the hobby and the ones that are trying to support it, it's that your real life is actually important, and that it kind of does have to come before your fantasies. So just pay attention to that. But that's not a GM sin, that's an everybody sin. So that's it. That's all 21 of Sven's GM sins. A lot of which I agree with. Some of which I am like, this more applies to everybody. One or two which I completely disagree with. And I bet you would have your own thoughts on that as well. Are there any other questions that we want to throw out there before we're ending? We've got 10 minutes left, but I could end it early if we feel like we've covered enough stuff. I imagine that I'll give people a chance to answer this. See what people have to say. Looks like we're getting... Yeah, it looks like we're getting close to the end. So I might as well start wrapping up at this point. We talk about sins a lot. I mean, Pukajutsu, sometimes sinning is the most fun. I'd like a list of things that GMs do right. I mean, we can get into that, but that's its own topic. That's going to have to be another day, I imagine. Tomorrow, twitch.tv/Elizabeth A. Neal will be more punchy. That's more Mass Effect at 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time over there. On Saturday is the rewatch for Exalted Twitch Academy episode 19. That's at 11 a.m. here on this channel. 3 p.m. will be Drew Crew, and 5 p.m. will be Doomed. And then on Sunday will be episode 20. And if you've seen episode 20s, I mean, I'm building it up. I can't necessarily always do episode 20s the way that I do episode 20s, but there you go. It'll be episode 20. And remember that there's only 2 episodes left, 20 and 21, before we say that our first season of Exalt Twitch Exalt Twitch Academy is done. We'll have 1 session after that to discuss the campaign, our Froyo for season 1. And then we'll take a little bit of a break, run some one-shots, and we'll come back with more Exalted content after that. So we will see what we can do with that. I am going to go see what I can do about making some dinner and possibly burying my head into the manuscript for chapter 1 of Exalted Essence. So I've got stuff to do. I'm sure you do too. Just remember that you can always use your word hole, but sometimes you can't. So you do have to be careful when you're expecting others to do so, but it does remain one of, if not the most effective way to get what you want. See you next time.